But first, a fault has developed in America's Voyager 2 spacecraft, which has just taken the best close-up pictures of the planet Saturn ever seen. It was discovered about 2 hours ago that the cameras are jammed and scientists on the ground can no longer tilt them in the directions that they want. Everything else on the craft is functioning perfectly normally, and scientists have just told us that there's no reason to think that Voyager collided with anything when it passed through Saturn's rings. Engineers at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California are trying to work out just why the camera's jammed. Gary Hunt has been tracing its progress.
These last few hours have been the climax of the Voyager encounter with Saturn, as the spacecraft has taken pictures of the satellites and seen the rings at higher resolutions than ever before. Enceladus has given us a new set of surprises. Some parts of it are heavily cratered, others are very smooth. This particular satellite is quite different from all the others of the Saturnian system. The rings at higher resolution are incredibly complicated. Within one of the divisions, Encke's division, a new ringlet has been seen. There clearly must be at least one more moon to add to the 17 known to be around the Saturn system, and probably there are others there as well.
Well, before it ran into these problems, Voyager 2 brushed the clouds of Saturn and gave scientists their best ever view of the planet, its rings and its moons. It made its closest approach to Saturn early this morning, just 3.1 seconds early, after a 4-year space journey. The Voyager team manager called it the most flawless, perfect encounter I've ever seen. Voyager 2 was launched in 1977 to undertake the most extensive journey of space exploration ever attempted. It's travelled nearly 1.5 billion miles to reach Saturn. It's now dropped through Saturn's rings and is on its way to Uranus, and from there to Neptune in 1989, 8 years from now. This morning's encounter was the first climax of its long mission. Nick Glass reports on the build-up last night.
It's been a long and exhausting night for the scientists at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California, monitoring the pictures as they come in from Voyager. But even in the hours leading up to the close encounter, there have been moments of undisguised excitement. The imaging team, as they're called, have over 18,000 pictures to analyze. Some create more questions, others answers.
We were startled by the sort of irregularity of the Saturnian satellites. The Jupiter system is so nice and regular, but the last two we've seen sort of fill in the blank places. Today we saw even more startling thing, and this was our favorite. We've been looking forward to seeing Enceladus. We thought it might be dynamically the most active of the bodies, and it's due to tidal pulls of Saturn.
The planet and its moons aren't just pretty to look at. They also have a sound all their own. Scientists in London, hearing the sounds transmitted from Voyager by the Motorola Electronic Company, try and explain.
It may sound melodic, but that's only, let's say, a conjunction of fate in terms of the waves of these particles, these highly charged particles that it's picking up, when converted to audio signals, when it passes through this particular region, do string together, you know, and sound like pitch, variations of pitch from.
I mean, that's the sound you would hear if you were standing.
It is like a...
No, well, if you have radio ears, I mean, you'd have to have ears which are tuned into different frequencies than ours.
And we'll have new pictures from Voyager in our programs later today. The Russians have today confirmed that one of their satellites has crashed to Earth, but they're denying Australian reports that any of the debris...
Spotted many different weather features which seem to be rapidly changing. When they are coloured, it's clear that Saturn has weather to make an English summer seem tranquil. The rings still provide most of the scientific problems. The NASA men now believe there must be thousands of them, but they don't know why there are gaps or why some of them aren't circular.
The news at 5:45 with Leonard Parkin.
The Angola fighting, Britain tells South Africa, pull out your troops. Saturn, vital pictures are lost as Voyager runs into trouble. The 1,000-year-old boot that belonged to a Viking in York. The spaceship Voyager 2 has completed its encounter with the planet Saturn, but a mechanical fault means vital close-up pictures of the planet's moons and rings have been lost. Voyager came closest to Saturn early this morning. It was just 3.1 seconds early for the rendezvous after a journey of 4 years. It then passed behind Saturn and out of radio contact with Earth. And when it emerged again, it became clear that the camera mountings had jammed.
This was the climax of the mission, with a close encounter, with Voyager's cameras taking thousands of pictures. But when the spacecraft passed behind Saturn and out of control with the Earth, things started to go wrong. The scan platform that houses the major instruments, and in particular the cameras, has locked in position, so that we're only seeing pictures of dark space. However, before this problem arose, the pictures of the planet, rings and moons taken before the encounter have shown the new details far beyond our wildest dreams. During the last few days, we've seen the other face to Hyperion, still a strangely irregular body, pitted with craters, suggesting numerous collisions as in the recent past. Titan II has shown changes in its giant nitrogen atmosphere. A huge dark collar is seen at the North Pole on an otherwise featureless orange disk. The recent high-resolution pictures of the rings have shown thousands of ringlets and considerable detail and differences in the structure of the blue C ring and darker B ring. But in addition to the beauty of Saturn and its rings, the invisible charged particles add a further dimension of their own by their special sounds.
The Angolan invasion, the South African Prime Minister says it's being exaggerated. Britain tells him, take your troops out. Close encounter 1 billion miles away. Saturn before Voyager's camera jammed. Voyager 2 has run into problems just after its triumphant pass of Saturn and its 17 moons. The spacecraft had been sending back pictures of a quality which amazed NASA scientists, but they were pictures which posed more problems than they solved. Then, after being out of contact behind the ringed planet, a fault occurred in the camera swiveling gear and it jammed. NASA still don't know why or how bad the damage is. It's the first major fault in Voyager's 4-year, 1.5 billion mile journey. An amazing feat, as David Wilson explains.
The NASA computers have now got going on the close-up pictures of Saturn's weather and shown just how successful Voyager 2 was in its finest hour. They've shown, too, how beautiful is the complicated system of rings, which scientists now consider must consist of thousands of tiny individual rings. Saturn's 17 moons are also clearer. This is Titan, with its own rich atmosphere, and this Iapetus, like Harlequin, half white and half dark in colour. One of the last pictures covered one of the shepherd moons, S25. You can just see the outermost ring, bottom right, held in place by this moon. Ever since takeoff exactly 4 years ago, Voyager 2 has been a superb machine. Early today, it was only 3 seconds and 30 miles off target. They said it was like holing a putt from 500 miles. But as it plunged to closest approach, it was behind Saturn and approaching the plane of the rocks and boulders of the rings. We don't know if it actually hit anything there, but there was an anxious, silent wait for the scientists in California. But as Voyager came in view again, signals were received and everyone cheered. But total triumph was short-lived.
Instruments appears to be stuck in the azimuth direction, and we just don't have all of the data we need yet to understand that problem. It's on board the tape recorder in the spacecraft.
How much could this peril the rest of the mission?
Well, I think it's a kind of problem, I think, that can be worked, but we just need the data to look at. Of course, everything else on the spacecraft is functioning normally. No other problems.
Voyager's cameras are on the end of a boom. It's their mounting arm that has stuck. It can no longer swivel them around. And the last pictures were of a black and empty space until the scientists kindly closed the camera shutters. The NASA space engineers will, of course, work frantically to get the thing moving again, and they've 5 years to do it before Voyager reaches Uranus. And one can only hope that the voyage for 4 years after that to the giant cold Neptune will not be a blind and useless trip. But while we remember the magnificence of Voyager's Saturn pictures, the American taxpayer has to decide whether it's worth his while. There's no firm commitment to any further exploration like Voyager's, and further pictures will depend on further dollars.
Voyager snapped Saturn, but now it's gone blank. Britain tells South Africa, get your troops out of Angola. Pan Am tells its staff, take a 10% cut. Ovet is back, breaking the world mile record. And just how soft were the Vikings in Yorkshire? Good evening. The Voyager 2 spacecraft has taken important pictures on the nearest pass that man has made to the planet Saturn and its satellites. But Voyager's camera platform has jammed. The cameras are taking empty space now, and the scientists are trying to put things right 1,000 million miles away, so that every signal to the spacecraft takes 3 hours to go and come back. When Voyager made its closest approach to Saturn at 54,000 miles an hour, the scientists watching at Pasadena, California, cheered in delight. But Voyager had to go behind Saturn and through one of its dangerous rings to find out how the rings worked. The rings are full of rocks and icebergs, and scientists now don't know what causes the gaps between the rings through which they hoped Voyager might slip. It's said to be a moderate probability that something may have hit the camera platform. The platform's very vulnerable at the end of a long antenna, though the platform also jammed on the Voyager 1 flight, and they managed to put that right. In the 20 years of unmanned flight through our solar system, the machines have told us that Mars is a frozen desert, a near miss for life, that Venus is an overheated, poisonous greenhouse, and Jupiter just a ball of gas. So what do we know about Saturn? From the team in California, Dr. Gary Hunt.
In the last day, we've learned a great deal about Saturn and its surrounding rings and moons from the dramatic pictures that have been brought back by the Voyager 2 spacecraft. The spacecraft in the last few hours has shown us the first glimpse of the North Polar region, and this picture is a good indication of the true colour of that region. A giant storm can be seen here at a latitude of more than 70 degrees. But although those features may look quite different from those on Earth, this long jet stream and the load that's associated with it are the sort of things we find in our weather forecasting patterns here on Earth. But Saturn is more than just a planet and the rings. It also has a strange collection of satellites. And Hyperion has really set a large number of puzzles for us. Strangely shaped, pitted with a large number of very small craters. Perhaps this was collided by a larger body sometime in the past. We have seen another face of Tethys, and the large valley seems to run more than 3/4 of the way across the surface and almost intersected by a giant crater. But Enceladus is giving us the surprises. Densely cratered at one part, less cratered somewhere else, and very smooth with long linear filaments. A very young surface, and we've yet to find out what is in fact shaping it. But the rings we're learning more about, and certainly there's so many ringlets that we counted across, and the inside there are more than 1,000. We can see here the structure of the Cassini division and the outer rings, and then the tiny shepherding satellite outside of the ring structure itself. These last observations have answered some of our early questions, but at the same time posed a large number of new ones to be studied as we look in more detail at the data.
Gary, I see beside you a television monitor which looks to have a blank screen. So what are the problems?
I think that immediately illustrates, Alistair, the problem we're having. We've got the scan platform jammed and the cameras actually are pointing to space rather than to the satellites and the planet that we wish to be looking at. We've been in this position for something like 12 hours. The engineers and scientists together have been up for most of the night wrestling with this problem, and we're trying desperately to solve it. It's very difficult. It takes an hour and a half to send a message to Saturn, an hour and a half to get it back from the spacecraft. So that's how long this problem is going to take us.
But would you say the mission has been a success?
This mission has been an amazing success. We've got 99% of all the data we require. We're likely to achieve most of our scientific objectives, and certainly there are a large number of questions that it can take us years, probably decades, to try and understand. we've had a very successful time.
Britain has told the South Africa.
Good evening. Something happened to Voyager 2 when it was on the dark side of Saturn. It had swooped triumphantly under the planet and then re-emerged with its camera swivel at the bottom of Voyager there, locked into a useless position, apparently the victim of a collision in outer space. Before that happened, Voyager 2 had been doing its job superbly, with pictures that will make the scientists rewrite their theories once again. A closer look at that closer look in a few moments. The Post Office returns profits of over £200 million, but don't expect a fall in charges, quite the reverse. And South Africa says that its troops a million miles away from Earth, a robot ship, Voyager 2, has run into trouble. It seems that something went wrong early this morning when the craft was passing behind the planet. At first there was jubilation among the scientists in California as the first radio signals were heard after the blackout. But then came the announcement of trouble.
I wanted to make a very brief statement. We do have a problem on board the Voyager 2 spacecraft. As most of you know, about 12 midnight Pacific Daylight Time, the spacecraft came out from behind the planet. We recovered the signal as we expected, essentially on time, and we had no evidence of problems. However, we had no data. This was signal only, carrier only, and it was some 33 minutes later that the spacecraft data began to arrive here on the ground. And a few minutes later, we saw that the spacecraft scan platform, this platform that moves in azimuth and elevation, was not functioning properly.
And these are the last pictures transmitted by Voyager, with its cameras now pointed uselessly out into empty space. The faulty instrument platform is on a boom attached to the main body of the spacecraft. NASA scientists are still attempting to find out what's caused the platform to jam, but they say it could be another 8 to 10 hours before they know. But before the trouble struck the Voyager had still produced some fascinating pictures, and I'll be looking at some of those with Dr. Paul Butterworth, a planetary astronomer from Leicester University, later. They're the fruits of just one of the stages of Voyager's journey. It's just over 4 years since Voyager 2 left Earth on what has, up to now, been a stunningly successful mission. Jupiter was first on the itinerary Voyager passed by 2 years ago, using the giant planet's gravity like a slingshot to hurl it on towards Saturn. This computer simulation shows what it would have been like to be on board the spacecraft over the past hours as it encountered the ringed planet. And these are real pictures from Voyager 2 showing its approach to Saturn as it actually happened. Here, hundreds of stills have been combined to give an animation effect. After taking these pictures, Voyager moved behind Saturn and passed through the rings. It was here the trouble struck. There's speculation that Voyager may have collided with one of the minute rock or ice particles that constitute Saturn's rings. At this moment, the spacecraft is speeding away from the Saturn system with its optical instruments pointing in the wrong direction. It's beginning the next stage of its mission, a 5-year journey to Uranus. But unless scientists in California can correct the faulty instrument platform, this unique opportunity may be at least partially wasted. On the 24th of August 1989, the spacecraft will arrive at Neptune, and because of the present configuration of the solar system, this encounter may be the only chance of visiting this planet for the next 200 years. Well, let's talk about the possible damage to Voyager 2 in a few moments. First of all, what has Voyager 2 achieved? I mean, how much better are these pictures than those from Voyager 1?
Voyager 2 has had a different set of targets from Voyager 1. We've seen the rings and the body of the planet with better resolution than Voyager 1 achieved because the cameras are superior and we've gone in closer. We've also looked at a different set of satellites.
Well, this first picture that we've got is of one of the satellites. What's so revealing about this one?
Yes, this is the satellite Enceladus, which is one of the inner satellites, and we got a distant view of it from Voyager 1. It looked interesting, so it was made a high-priority target for Voyager 2. It was interesting because it looked very bright, it looked smooth, and we couldn't see many craters. Here we can see a few craters in the lower right, but there are areas where the crater density is very low.
And what conclusion do you draw from that?
We're probably seeing the effects of some kind of resurfacing, perhaps ice and slush flows.
And that's pretty unusual, is it?
Yes, it's the only case we've seen it in the Saturn system so far.
Right, let's move on to another one of the satellites. What can you tell me about this?
Yes, this is Iapetus, which is an outer satellite. Like all the large satellites, it's tidally locked, so it shows the same face at all times to the planet Saturn. This means it has a leading hemisphere and a trailing hemisphere, and they're very different in this case. The leading hemisphere is quite a lot darker. It seems to have picked up some debris during its circuit of Saturn.
And now the third one of the satellites we're going to look at, this I think is Titan. That looks a bit vague. What's interesting there?
Yes, it may not look very interesting here, but it is probably the second most interesting place in the solar system after the Earth.
That's a big claim.
Yes, it has a very substantial atmosphere, about 1.5 times as dense as that of the Earth, and down below it there may be such exotic things as methane oceans, methane ice caps, and we know that there are lots of organic molecules in the atmosphere, and these may in fact be raining down on the surface.
So you mean at some stage in the unforeseeable future, life, some sort of living organisms might actually be created on its surface?
Yes, we need to warm it up a little. It's very cold at the moment.
Right, the rings, we've got a couple of photographs of the rings that particularly interest you. What's remarkable about this one?
Yes, even the small satellites have their interests, not so much the properties of their bodies, but their behavior. Here we see one of the so-called shepherd moons, which by its gravitational action is actually controlling and constraining part of the ring system.
And of the ring systems themselves, so I think we have a direct picture of that. How much more has Voyager 2 shown us of that? It really does look like the inside of a gramophone record, doesn't it?
Yes, we see more complexity the harder we look. The problem is not producing theories to explain the incredible structures that we're seeing. It's just that the theories that we do produce then don't survive new observations. We've had a theory called the resonance theory, which failed at Voyager 1. We then thought up a theory involving small moonlets. We haven't seen those moonlets yet, so that theory seems to be failing as well.
So you'll have to look at these and find a new set of theories about the rings.
That's right, yes, and they'll probably fail too.
Right, and finally we've got one of the surface of the planet itself. Now, what you deduce from this? It's a really spectacular one.
Yes, it's certainly got some nice colours, and the features in there are spectacular too. We're seeing a number of spots which are similar to spots we've seen in the atmosphere of Jupiter. These are very long-lived vortices which go down quite deep into the atmosphere. They're relatives of storms in the Earth's atmosphere, but they last a lot longer and they're very much larger.
So this confirms there is a very turbulent atmosphere on the planet?
Yes.
Now, just briefly, the damage, how bad do you think that the damage is?
The loss we've already suffered in losing approximately 1/3 of the photographs we've planned is a very sad one, but it will be very much sadder if we can't get the scan platform operating properly by the time we reach Uranus.
But they did have something like this happen to Voyager 1, didn't they?
Yes, the scan platform of Voyager 1 jammed very early after launch, and it was freed by the JPL engineers. I hope they can do the same this time.
Thanks very much indeed. Let's hope they do. Paul Butterworth, in a few moments...
Calls out for its second journey into space. Inching its way out of the Florida dawn at the start of its